everyone. Welcome to another extra sharp episode of ARG Presents. I'm Amigo Aaron, joined as always by the captain to my Tennille and the oats to my Hall. We call him the Brent.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
If you joined us last week, and you may have, we spun the wheel and we made the deal. And this week, we'll be looking at games on the extra super duper rare and incredibly exciting X68000 computer from Sharp via Japan. Brent, what did you know about the X68000 Sharp computer from Japan?
They turned the dial all the way up to 68,000.
That's right.
I think they paid extra for that.
That's right. It's got one extra notch.
110, 68,000. Wow.
That's right.
I knew nothing about this. I didn't know it existed. After doing a little research, checking out all the games they had on it, man, talk about a system dedicated to shooters.
Yeah, this system is, it's quite a system, and I did a little research on it just to get up to spec. And a big chunk of my research was pre-done for me by our good friend of the show, Graham Webke, who has already written a big tech piece on this show, and so he just sort of steered me in the right direction.
Nice.
So, a lot of people won't know about the Sharp X68000. And the reason is it was exclusively released in Japan.
Right.
But such was its incredible power that the legend of its incredible games has reached our shore. And so it's sort of become sort of a internet darling emulation system in the last few years. So in Japan, it was released in March of '87. Yes. Right now, this was an expensive unit.
Yes,
okay?
It was. Holy cow.
When it launched, it was the price over there was 369,000 yen. That sounds like a lot, but that was $3,000.
Yes,
in American hard currency in '87, and in today's money, $6,600, almost $6,700.
You can get a pinball machine for that.
Yeah, barely, right? Now, one needs to remember that in '87, computers were more expensive.
Right, okay. Of course.
Thousands of dollars.
Sure.
Okay. That said, that is a tremendous sum.
Yeah, that's still
and we have finally found
a
computer console that trumps the Neo Geo that we covered a few weeks ago. So
by 68,000.
Now, this is an interesting system. I want to get into a little bit of the technical aspects of it. So this had a 68,000 CPU, but it was a Motorola clone that was made by Hitachi. Okay, so it was a clone. 10 megahertz, if you can believe that.
Yeah, it's pretty big back then.
I know it's still, if you look at what they've got, 10 megahertz doesn't seem like that much, to me. It didn't have a ton of memory either. It had 1 meg, the original, and it was expandable to 4, but most of the games didn't use that extra memory. They didn't require it.
Right.
With Street Fighter 2 being the exception that is notable in that department. It actually did require 4 megs of memory. It had a real nice FM synth chip in it. It had it was a higher def, it was a higher resolution graphics ability than you would normally have expected. I mean, if you consider what was going on the PC in '87, I'd say the nearest competitor to this graphic-wise in '87 would probably be the Amiga.
Oh, certainly.
But really, if you think about it, I mean, if you lay down a game to game, I mean, this thing has custom. This thing was built from the ground up to play arcade games.
Yes. Yeah.
It has a VGA port in it, so that's a good thing. It's also got component RGB in and out, which is unusual. If I had floppy disks, it ran on 5 1/4 inch floppies. And it had a tower case that had a handle in it. It was actually a pretty interesting.
It was an awesome looking.
How would you explain how it's black and it looking sharp? No pun intended.
It almost looks like a suitcase or a briefcase, sort of.
It does. And the keyboard, a 113 key keyboard. It looks like a pretty cool looking keyboard. It's pretty standard stuff. There was a Pro model, and there are other models that came later that you could expand those up to 12 megs of memory, so you could get up there a little bit. Again, you got to consider this is '87, and the other models actually improved on the processor, including a genuine Motorola 68,000 CPU at 16 megahertz. Then they had another model that had a genuine Motorola in it it was a 6830 at 25 megahertz. So you're playing in the same area that the Amiga did.
Yeah.
But this had a whole different set of custom graphics chips and whatnot.
Yeah, I would say it was superior in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know how it was as a computer.
Oh,
so
I got nothing about
who
that
knows?
either.
Who knows on that? So it had an operating system in it that was developed by Hudson Soft, or Hudson Soft of software fame. They've made a lot of software titles, and they were also sort of the driving force behind the PC Engine Flash Turbo Graphics. So they were, of course, that Hudson Soft was a big player in Japan. I mean, they were a huge player over there. So there was even a GUI based OS for it, sort of a Windows-esque OS. From what I read, and this, of course, is always up for debate, but there were around 262 games released for the system.
Yes, that's.
Is that what you heard?
Actually, that seems a little high.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's probably in the ballpark.
Well, my main exposure to the Sharp is via emulation on the Xbox, the original, and on the Raspberry Pi iterations of the various front ends. And I noticed that there are games that I would say aren't commercially available that someone had redone.
Seemed like a lot of
hacks. I
hacks.
saw a Mr. Dude that looked like that, and a couple other ones that looked like maybe someone. So there were probably people that were kind of porting in games to it on their own. This was also known to be one of Capcom's main development machines.
They're darling.
Which, if you consider that. It's quite impressive. I mean, if you're developing your games on this thing, so needless to say, Capcom ports of this system are very impressive. Yes. This, as Brent mentioned, this system was heavily used to do arcade conversions.
Yeah,
and they did some real unusual ones, including I noticed they had a conversion of Exciting Hour, which we know as Map Mania.
Yep.
I'm a big fan. They had a ton of shooters. That came straight from the arcade, and they look very, very good.
70% of the library.
I would say. You've got your Gradius and all that, and Spawn,
your verticals, your horizontals. You've literally any shooter you can think of.
I think Viewpoint was on there. We covered that a couple episodes ago,
yes.
And so it was very more than capable of running these games. Just while we're all talking about it, I went ahead to see because I would love to have one of these. It would be great, right? So I looked to see what they were going for. I found a fully working system on eBay that had been bought in America and shipped to us, and it went for $1,660.
Yeah.
Actually, I changed it. No one bid on it at $1,660, but it was the only one I saw that was fully working. Now I saw a guy who sold one untested. It had nothing, who knows what's in the case. It went for $300. And I did see a working keyboard, just the keyboard, mind you, sell for $151.
Yeah, everything on this system is pretty up there.
Right. So, looking over the game library, did you see anything that talked to you in terms of? Conversion ability? It said that until the Neo Geo came around, this was as close to the arcades you can get. And I had to say,
I would believe it.
Yeah, I mean, you could. For the most part, you could take these games and put them in an arcade cabinet, and you would have the arcade game.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very similar.
Yeah, I was impressed by the speed at which the shooters ran.
Yeah,
they were all from the ones I saw full speed. They were full speed with tons of sprites. There were a couple bullet hell games on it that held up to the speed test. And I know Japan, that's their culture, they're big into those shooters.
Yeah.
And this system certainly took advantage of that. And really, that was, like I said, it was easily 70% of their game library.
Right. So, the Sharp, it was around for a while. And like I said, eventually, it kind of gave way to, because in effect, it was a game machine. It was a computer, but it was a game machine. Most of the games for it were shipped on floppies or multiple floppies.
Yeah.
And so those have a shelf life too, and that's going to add to it. But it was, people say, like I said, that the Neo Geo eventually kind of took over the thunder for it in the early '90s, and I'd say they're comparable systems in a lot of ways. I don't know. I mean, Neo Geo's got more powerful hardware, but I mean, man, some of the stuff I saw on the Sharp was so impressive that I wonder how far down the pike it was from the Neo Geo in terms of actual ability.
Well, and where Neo Geo is sort of known for its fighting machines, I'm sure this is known for its shooting games, and
Yeah.
I'm sure people that really latch onto that type of game seek these out, and that's probably why they still have a decent price tag. I know some of the reviews and research I did said that getting one of these working shipped to America is still a $1,500 ordeal.
Yeah, and they also have a notoriously flaky power supply.
Yes,
That I read it's fixable. We could fix one if the chips and stuff were all good, but it would be no easy feat.
Right.
And a feat that probably the funny thing about a machine like the 68,000, and Brent sort of mentioned this before we came on the air, is that the majority of the coin-op conversions were so close that in a day where you could play the coin-op, it almost makes this system a lot of times the game's irrelevant unless they added something a little bit different.
It had very, very few exclusives.
Yeah, I tried. At first, I thought I'd tried to do just something, and I couldn't really find anything that I could get sink my teeth into. In fact, speaking of fighting games, I told you at one time that I was deeply considering going to Street Fighter 2 for the machine,
right,
which was well known as a tremendous port. But I did have a look at it and some of the other games, the fighting games, and they looked very good. Roy, the one thing that you would find different from this than the arcade would be the sound. It is more of a MIDI type sound system in it, and as opposed to don't get me wrong, the sound effects are top shelf, but the music itself is a little different. As I recall, it even has certain games gave you the ability to roll directly into like a keyboard and play special like MIDI versions of the songs you play. I mean, it had some interesting secondary aspects, where you could hook it up to different, keyboards that had different sound systems and stuff.
Yeah, you could buy whole MIDI boxes for this, and well, I don't know if most games, a majority of the games though had sound settings to say I'm going to play the MIDI sounds or the sounds that are for the Sharp. Also, something that was a strange choice considering what they were going for here. The joysticks for the system were 2-button for the actual setup were 2-button sticks, and a lot of games I saw came packed with their own controllers.
Yeah,
and they were the standard 11-pin. I think it was 11-pin setup, and you could actually plug in a 6-button Genesis stick for it, and it would work. But yeah, a lot of games, some games it didn't make any sense to have pack-in joysticks, but I guess it was just the thing at the time. I saw a Pac-Man type game that had a built-in, came with a joystick.
I like the idea. I've always liked games that you came with a stick. I bought a couple PC games exclusively for the stick.
Right.
That came with it. It's a good gimmick. You have to charge a few extra bucks, and
that's a lot extra.
Sometimes
bucks.
if you pack a joystick in with a crummier game, people will, like I said, I bought a game that was a basketball game called Jam, I believe, just exclusively because I thought the controller looked good. Turns out it sucked. So, with all that out of the way, we looked over the vast library of 270 plus games to pick a couple out just to have a look at. And I will admit, neither one of these games I'd ever played on the 68,000. But I had played in both these games in other systems, so it made it a little more interesting to compare and contrast. So, Brent, why don't you lead the charge this week?
I picked Wings of Fury, or as it is known in Japan, just as Wings. And unfortunately, I was unable to find the Japanese box art, but I do have it on screen now. Ooh. For those watching at home, Wings of Fury has some interesting backstory that I didn't know until I started doing the research for the game. For those that don't know, it was a game that was initially released in 1987, released on a ton of systems. Apple II was the one that originally got the game, but it was also released on the Amiga, where I played it a ton. The Amstrad CPC, Commodore 64, DOS, the Game Boy Color had a version of this. The NEC PC 9801.
I believe that's another Japanese.
Possibly. Yeah. And of course, the 68,000.
I'd say I never would have guessed it got that many ports of that. I didn't think. I mean, I remember playing this on the Amiga, and I was just like, you know.
And the game was originally released in 1987. It was ported to the Sharp in 1989. The Amstrad was actually the Amstrad, the Commodore 64, the Amiga, and the MS-DOS release all came later than that. They got ported in 1990. So this was an earlier port. And of course, the Game Boy Color game came way later. It was the gameplay for Wings of Fury, or Wings as it was on the Sharp, is a horizontal shooter of sorts with a tad bit of simulation. And in all of the versions except for the Sharp, you play as the Americans on World War II, and you are flying your American F6F Hellcat, and you are bombing the islands that Japan was occupying, killing the troops, sinking their battleships, sinking their destroyers and their aircraft carriers, all while coming back to your aircraft carrier periodically to land, refuel, re-armor up, change weapons. One of the big selling points of this game is you could choose between bombs, rockets, or torpedoes as from the ship, which was a neat aspect because you needed certain weapons to take care of certain obstacles. In the Sharp version, since it was a Japanese-only system, you don't play as the Americans, because that would be kind of weird. You play as the Japanese. And you fly a Japanese Zero. It's wacky to think of that. It is mind-blowing. I was starting to look for games where you exclusively played as the Japanese in a World War II setting.
All right.
Almost none.
So if you think about it, even stuff like 1942, which was a Japanese game, one of their big sellers, you played as the Americans in that the whole time. You know, it is an odd twist. That's for sure. It is,
and
but not for them. It wouldn't be odd at all.
Right, but it felt weird as an American flying a Japanese Zero, bombing American things, because the way they're represented in the game, for the most part, is you just have their little bases have Japanese flags raised or American flags raised, depending on what version you play. But it did feel different bombing Americans in my Japanese Zero than it did vice versa. And I guess that's mainly a mental thing. I guess we're kind of conditioned, USA good, Japan bad in World War II settings. That was a unique experience. And something else that I found while researching this is this game actually got added to the BPJS or the BPJM in Germany, which is the Federal Department for Media Harmful to Young Persons. The game was actually banned, and when you get on this list, it's not banned as in you can't buy it, but you can't advertise it. You can't have it on store shelves. Can't even mention it in reviews or anything. No media. If you go in, you can ask for it by name, and it's an under the counter game. And it was actually added in 1992. Which is probably past its peak, considering when it was released. But I found that a little bit odd. And I know it has to do with the World War II setting that the game is portrayed in.
Me and Boat ran into this when we were doing an Amiga game. Gosh, I wish I could remember what it was. But I know from what I've read and what I've heard from friends of ours, sometimes the Germans are quick with the trigger on putting you on this list, and often it's borderline silly. Now that said, in this particular game, now was this Wings of Fury all over, or just the X30, the 6800 version?
Any version
really
that was sold in Germany, which would have been the Wings of Fury you're the Americans bombing the Japanese.
Well, I'll say, given the circumstances, the Germans understandably sensitive about the subject.
Sure.
I've got a German friend and hesitates to ever talk about anything involved in that, which is understandable. But yeah, that ban list is can get a little flaky. That's for sure.
It's actually the first time I've ran into a game being on it that I didn't expect to be there. Because since Germany's, I mean, it's really nowhere in the game at all.
Right.
It's always
yeah.
But anyway, so the game came out to pretty well received reviews. Got a 4 out of 5 in Dragon magazine. Computer Gaming World said it was the best action. It was some of the best action graphics pulled out of the Apple for the Apple version.
Mm-hmm.
I could not find a Sharp review exclusive to that system. In fact, finding anything having to do with the Sharp was a complete pain in the butt, including getting some of the emulator stuff. But I'm not going to harp on that. Some other trivias about the game in general. The Apple II had some major copyright protection on it. Had a very specialized copyright protection. The EGA version of the game was only 12 colors, and it actually ran faster than the CGA version. I thought that was kind of interesting. But the game on the Sharp itself, I thought handled kind of clunky compared to the later Amiga version that I was using. I thought the graphics were fine. I thought the sound was fine. But controlling the plane seemed less responsive. And it's not because the system couldn't do it. Because it obviously, some of the other games on the system are mind-blowing. But I did not feel it was as smooth to control. Even cranking up some of the emulator speed, it just didn't seem like it had all the frames it needed to be as smooth and as fun as the Amiga version. Did you experience anything like that?
Well, for one thing, clearly you have to navigate the Japanese menu,
which isn't very difficult.
Well, no, but they make a difference, and I had to look up some versions to tell me what. This is on a system like the Sharp. This is a real low-end game graphically. Now, I might say it doesn't look bad. It looks pretty good, but there's not a whole lot of real hardcore. They're not taxing the system.
Well, I mean, I agree with that, but it does have where if you fly high above your target, it has that zoomed-out view.
It's almost like scaling, but it's not, right?
It's fake scaling.
Right.
Is what it is. 100% what it is. And when you go down closer to the ground, it does zoom in a little bit. It has a camera on your dash, on your readout bar, that sort of shows you what you're looking at from your nose perspective.
Right.
But it is very fake.
It's mostly it helps you
land.
Also when you're dive bombing or strafing.
Sort of, because you don't actually see your targets in that view. You only see if you're pointing at land or if you're pointing at sea. But it's not a pitch indicator.
Right.
It actually it's supposed to be a camera.
It's something that surely a Zero wouldn't have had. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
This is a real oddball game, and even on the Amiga when I played it. Because Broderbund put this out, which doesn't seem like a title that they would do.
They've developed and produced,
and they did it in here in the Japanese version. They did. Part of it is a very intriguing title. What the intrigue comes from is on the Japanese version. In the American version, you start out bombing those islands. In the Japanese versions, every time I've tried it, every different little option, you start off with an American. I guess that's a destroyer. I don't think it's an aircraft carrier. It might be, because they do send out aircraft, so it may be. But you start off going after, trying to sink a ship, right? So that right there was a difference.
That's a difference even from my experience.
Yeah,
I didn't experience
mine was, the very first thing you did was go after an American.
I think you were actually starting on a higher difficulty.
I used the sheet to tell me where I was starting. So, I mean, I tried different options, and I always started on that.
Yeah, mine started on the same island. bombing
So I actually
bunkers.
got to go after the ship. And I'll tell you something, because I'm used to doing the island bombing, because I wasn't very good at this game on the Amiga, and so I didn't get very far. So when you pick your ship, and you have to go out, and you go across the ocean a little ways, and you see the enemy ship, and you have to gain some altitude, and then depending on which plane you're using the bomber, you fly high, and you come down, and you come in like this and scoot over him like you go up. And then if you're using the torpedo ship, all you have to do is fly straight towards the bomb to the enemy ship, and then release that torpedo right before you get over it, and just literally fly right over it. And then you can also strafe guys, especially if you're on the islands. You can strafe guys. But what this does is it gives you a reason to. It changes how you approach the game depending on what you're doing that particular second. I like that. I like the fact that you swing around, you pass your ship, you swing back around, and you try to land. Landing on this game is a real chore. Taking off ain't no fun. I had a heck of a time getting up in the air. And if you saw my technique, it was the stupid. I would sit there and bank around like a maniac till I got high enough to be able to do anything. And I'm sure if I was better at this, it'd be an easier way. And the Amiga, I had a very similar situation. But once you land that, if you can land your plane, you can go down and switch your plane. If it's hurt, it'll go and fix it. It gives you a next plane with whatever the next ordinance is. But it's really like playing 3 different games. It's sort of, it's kind of neat. What else I like about it is that you're going to come up against some resistance with the enemy aircraft.
Yeah.
And the way that they do them is you'll see them bank around and stuff, and it's actually, if you think about war, if you ever watch war footage on like the History Channel, they show these things off in the distance, and there's planes going everywhere, and there's flak and stuff going up, and it was crazy time. This isn't quite that chaotic, but the enemy planes buzzing around you, and there's fires going off where you bomb stuff. It adds to the scenario. It gives you a little atmosphere.
Absolutely.
And I like that. I think that's a really cool aspect of it. Did I have a problem switching sides? Not really, because if you played any of these like Battlefield games, they have a lot of that stuff where you play the enemy.
I agree, but this was different, man. When you shoot the enemy soldiers, them yelling out, that was just, it was creepy.
Well, people yell when you shoot them. That's the way it goes. I believe Wings, the Game Boy version, I think it was, that you could play the Germans or the British or whatever. And so that's another game where you could sort of switch sides,
but not Japanese.
Right. Listen, it's
a lot of, and the reason why is, in my opinion, especially for ground assault games, the Japanese didn't do ground assault in World War II. They had a great Navy, they had a great Air Force, but when they were defending, they were, in bunkers, just and afraid to pop their heads out for the most part.
Well, I don't know about that. That's a subjective comment there. Don't hold me responsible for that.
I don't mean like fearful. I mean like you get shot when you do that.
Trust me, the Japanese the Japanese did have lead ground offensive. Don't be fooled.
But that was not what they were known for. They were known for their Navy and their Air Force.
I don't know where you're going with this exactly. What's that do with anything?
There aren't many games with that aspect in mind. Most World War II games are based on ground assaults and first-person shooters, or strategy games where you move troops around.
I don't know. Battlefield has aircraft. You can drive ships. It's got all that. So helicopters, whole 9 yards.
But you don't focus as the Japanese.
You're right.
That's my whole point.
It is unusual.
This is one of the only games that I can think of that has you are the Japanese, and you are carrying out your offensive against the Americans.
Yeah, it is a standout in an unusual
game. It is
game.
Absolutely a standout. And here's something else that you were talking about, where the feeling of the game, where it really kind of gives you that war-like atmosphere. The banking of the planes in this game is it's well done, incredibly beautiful for a 2D game. When you hit hard and you bank to do a 180, the animation for that is amazing.
It's also
in all versions.
It's also utterly unrealistic.
Well,
you could launch off your aircraft carrier and bank 2 or 3 times instantly, and which is not going to happen.
We're not looking at realism here.
I'm just saying, it's Bankamania is running wild with the aircraft. But I mean,
when your choices are left or right, you've got to make banking pretty quick.
And that's my biggest problem with this game, because I like the play aspects of it. I did not like the control. I've never liked the control in this game.
It's rough.
It's goofy. The landing is nigh impossible.
This is a game I played this a ton on the Amiga, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to look at it on this system. And I didn't even know about the whole role reversal, but I was curious at how they were why a Japanese-only system would have this game on it, which is what totally led me down this path, which got it on the show. However, it feels remarkably different than the Amiga version. The controls do not feel as tight on the Sharp. They don't feel as responsive. Landing on the Sharp seems incredibly more difficult. You have to slow down so much before getting to the edge of your aircraft, and you have to be so precise or you bounce off every time. In the Amiga, I can get through a ridiculous amount of levels, like 8 or 10 levels of this game, no problem. This, I struggled like crazy to get off of level 1. Now, my level 1 was the island.
Yeah, I don't understand.
I don't either.
It's so odd that I got to start with the aircraft carrier. You know, I will say the Amiga version is incredible. Is much slower than this one.
Yes,
and so that may have helped. I mean, and it's funny that they're actually staying pretty much toe to toe, except for that aspect of it.
I think the Amiga version has more frames of animation in the flying.
Hard to say.
I really think it does.
Hard to say.
I really think it does. eBay. This game sells for a lot $50.
Is that the disc version?
That is the disc.
They don't have a non-disc version.
Not for this game. Yeah, $55, and that is a sold copy, and that is the only one that's been on eBay in the last,
Is that
6
with the
months.
case and everything?
That is the box and the instruction manual too. But $55 for a game that you can get on other systems for dollars, not tens of dollars. But I think just looking through stuff, everything on the Sharp seems to be, it's like the Neo Geo. Everything seems to be more expensive.
You got to take a real chance too when you're buying these old floppy disks.
Yeah,
presumably someone's buying this just out on the shelf
I would assume so too, because the box art for the Japanese version is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I like it a lot more than on the
people
system.
will take chances. I can tell you that. I just sold a copy of the floppy disk and the original disc sleeve for Pooyan on the Atari 8-bit for $14. So someone took a chance on the. So people will do it. That's for sure.
So switching gears, talk about night and day games. You took a look at Final Fight.
That's right.
What'd you find?
Well, I found a pretty interesting game that's buried in here. So, Final Fight, in case you have not heard of it or maybe forgot what it was, Final Fight was probably one of the big time leaders in side-scrolling beat 'em ups. I mean, the modernized versions. It was released at '89 in the arcades, and then exclusively on the X68000 in Japan in '92. So not a huge gap between the two.
Quick, yeah.
So just to get into Final Fight a little bit, Final Fight is a game. It's a 1 or 2 player game. Choose between 3 characters. You can choose Guy. That's all you need to know.
Yeah.
Cody.
Yeah.
Cody is Guy is sort of a kung fu or striking practitioner. Cody is a straight up boxer.
Brawler, yeah.
He's got his fist taped. He's wearing a tight white shirt. He's ready to whoop a butt. And then my personal favorite, probably everyone's personal favorite, Mike Hagar. Mike Hagar is, I don't know, was he mayor? And I think he was the mayor of the town.
He was the mayor in this one, yeah.
And is a big, jacked up pro wrestler.
Yeah.
He walks around with a one strap, overalls, brown, and he does lots of grabs and throws and craziness. And I think he's everyone's favorite. But I mean, I will say it's funny in the arcade. I used to play Guy all the time. So that was my guy. So maybe it was nobody's favorite. I could be wrong. So when Capcom released this, and I should mention, this came out on everything.
Yeah,
you had the Amiga port. Less said about that, the better. And I just to briefly sidetrack, I've read an interview with the fellow that did the program for this, and he didn't. He kind of takes a lot of ridicule for this game, and because it wasn't very good, to be honest with you. It could have been better. But the guy, I will say, I have sympathy for the guy that did it. He was under a lot of. He has a lot of. They don't give you a lot of time to crank this stuff out, But anyway, it also was out on the Amstrad. Ponder that one. That would probably be interesting. The Atari ST, the C64, the PlayStation 2, the Mega CD / Genesis CD, the ZX Spectrum, the Xbox, the Game Boy Advance, the PlayStation Portable, iOS, and the Super Nintendo.
Which, yeah.
Now, Super Nintendo version is rather infamous. Brent, tell the people why.
Because you only had 2 characters.
And that's right. And that was a real bummer. At
the initial release, there was only 2 characters.
They booted. Guy did not make the cut.
That's right.
In that, now some of these other ones may have had fewer characters, but the Super Nintendo one, being the Super Nintendo, was very famous for this omission. And as I recall, eventually Guy got his own game that was basically him in the game. Right? Is that true?
Well, yes, sorta.
So
maybe we'll go over that on a Super Nintendo episode.
Yeah. So, what do you do in this game? Well, the plot is you're in the Metro City. You control one of these characters, and a bad guy, an outfit of bad guys, called the Mad Gear Gang, very Japanese, kidnapped Hager's young daughter Jessica, beautiful lady.
Which was awesome.
I believe she makes an appearance in. Doesn't she come in like Final Fight 2? I believe is she a playable character in one of these?
No,
I could have sworn she was. She showed up somewhere else. So,
but Jessica is also Cody's girlfriend and Guy's friend through Cody.
I thought it was Guy's girlfriend, because doesn't Cody go to jail after he beats up Guy at the end of this? There's
Cody and Jessica are boyfriend and girlfriend.
Okay, there you go. So there's a love triangle. You got somebody's daughter. It's crazy. One would wonder what the Kung Fu guy, how he got involved. He's their buddy.
Yeah, he's friends with Cody. That's his tie-in.
So with that background in mind, one sets off down the bad streets of Metro City to beat the tar out of the Mad Gear Gang and try to clear these various neighborhoods. Right, and a map shows at the beginning of the level, and it shows you what neighborhood you're in. You go through and you beat the tar out of a bunch of flunkies, and a boss battle at the end. And then when you clear all the bad guys off the level, that level is secured, and you will move on to the next level. Right, pretty standard stuff. But what made this game different than a lot of games is the incredible graphics at the time. They were quite remarkable. I remember the first time I saw this game in the arcade was in. I think it was Billy Bob's Pizza over near us, and I was like, "Holy mackerel!" I couldn't believe this game. And on top of everything else, it had aspects of Double Dragon, but it was so beautiful. It had those Street Fighter 2 style graphics that you can't look away.
Sprites,
hand drawn gorgeousness, and. You could do stuff that you couldn't come close to doing in Double Dragon. I mean, when you're playing Hagar, for example, he can grab a guy, headbutt him a couple of times, pick him up and jump in there and power bomb him.
Yeah, no, power drive.
No, you go off. I think it's more like a power bomb to me, but you say tomato. These guys can grab guys and just beat the tar out of them and throw them and stuff. It's really cool, and they're over the top, right?
Yeah.
So as you go through this game, you have life bars, and the bad guys you fight have life bars. Sometimes inanimate objects even have life bars, like doors. When you can beat a door up. And when you hit something, it identifies it at the top of the screen, says what it is you're battling, and it indicates how much how much power it's got left before you kill it, how many hit points it's got. So another thing that sets this game apart is are the bad guys in it. Now, as you know from playing games of this sort, your Double Dragons, your crime fighter, and whatnot, usually you have a certain pool of bad guys that are drawn from.
Yeah.
This game's no exception, but I will say it seems like at the time it seemed like a larger pool of bad guys. You had just generic guys, and you had big guys that would sort of block. You had these big, huge, fat guys that would kind of run you over. You had these weird guys that were in these like capes. I don't know how would you explain those guys? The caped guys with the masks and the lightning colors all over. Very strange. And of course, a lot of palette swaps to change what guys look like. Then you had these guys called the Andors. Andor Jr. These guys were basically Andre the Giant if Andre the Giant wore punk clothes.
Yeah.
And there's these big, huge guys, and they could grab you and throw you, and they could also leg drop you, big, huge leg drop, like the Hulkster. You also had a more controversial element, which were how do you put it? They were sort of transvestites, I guess would be the best way to put it. They looked sort of like sexy girls when you fought them,
right?
But they weren't sexy girls.
And it wasn't controversial at the time because you just said, okay, those are girls. But the controversy came way down the line.
Yeah, when you found out they were in fact not girls, they were really, really attractive, multiple twinned guys that would come at you. They were mean too. Then you had these guys that would slide on the ground with knives and throw knives, and you had guys that threw fire. They had all red suits, and they could throw fire. And one of the cool elements of the game is this stuff hurts everybody, so they'd hurt their own guy. They didn't care, And then you would fight the bosses. The bosses are a pretty interesting group. The first level boss is a guy named Damned. He's
which I thought was crazy to see at the time.
Oh yeah, cussing in a video game and at the showbiz or the Billy Bobs. Then you've got there's a bad cop that's in there. You got to fight him. You've got to fight this guy that throws grenades at one point on the always popular elevator level. You've got there's a lot of these. It's a lot of it's by today's standards you wouldn't think much about it, but it was pretty revolutionary at the time just due to the way it looked.
Well, the reason why we find it so passé today is because a lot of games copied the formula of Final Fight.
Right, yeah, exactly. I mean, copied it verbatim, effectively. So, like I said, the thing had 6 stages, and at the end, you would fight the big boss. The big boss had a gun. Yeah. I remember that. I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't seem fair. And I remember getting the big boss in the arcade the first time we played this. I can't remember. You may have been with me because somebody was playing with me. It was probably you. And it was just amazing how beautiful it looked. This boss was crazy. It was
riding around the wheelchair until he gets up.
It was really neat. Yeah, that's an old wrestling gimmick right there. The old fake wheelchair guy. Another thing this game had that I always thought was really cool was the continue screen, which if you didn't have them, if you got hurt or if you lost your game, it would show whatever character you were playing tied up in front of some dynamite.
Yeah,
and the dynamite there would be a fuse coming down. And your guy would be going trying to blow it out.
Depending on who you were, they actually had separate animations for each player. Because maybe it was Cody. Cody just is freaking out. He's struggling. Hagar tries to blow it out. Yeah, it was really well done. It made you feel bad if you didn't continue.
Now, here's something I didn't know when I was researching this. I found that I thought this was interesting. According to the developers of this, the game and the plot of this game were inspired by the 1984 film Streets of Fire. Have you ever seen Streets of Fire?
I have not.
As I recall, that's the movie where the title, one of the big tracks on it, was done by Jim Steinman. I think it was called actual song. I can't remember, but it was.
Someone will leave it in the comments.
But it was a rock and roll. A rock and roll fairy tale type film, as I recall. You never seen it, huh?
Mm-mm.
No, it did. As I recall, it bombed as well. But people were into it. But I never knew that they used that as the inspiration for the game, because I can actually sort of see it. Of course, we touched on the home versions, so we should touch on the 68,000 version. So that's a good basis for what we're talking about. So as we mentioned earlier, 68,000 version of this game was, or the 68,000 itself was a Capcom developer tool.
Yeah.
All right. So it should go without saying that the version is as close and as accurate as you probably can get on a home console or computer, sort of emulating the arcade. I played this with my son. We sat down and played it, and we went through it as far as we can. Now, there is a limited amount of continues on this, so and it does include the dynamite screen when you run out, except you can't put in more money.
Yeah.
You just get killed. And we ran through this a couple times, and I can tell you that that would be hard-pressed to determine that this wasn't the arcade version.
Yeah, it was pretty much 1-to-1. Maybe slightly less resolution.
Well, there are some key differences that you could tell, but they're you have to be paying attention. The main one is the music. The music in the 68,000 version has sort of that MIDI type music, and it's really good. Don't get me wrong, but it's not the same. It's not the same as what's in the arcade. It still sounds pretty good though.
Was this game? I wonder if this game was compatible with using some of the alternate sounds.
Well, I will tell you that this game shipped with a CD. Okay, with a music CD.
Really?
So one would assume,
I did not see that.
And it changes how much this thing will cost you. All right. So another aspect that's different is the Sharp version of Final Fight will only have a set amount of players on the screen. Now, I've heard people bandy back and forth about how many that is. I can tell you, because I heard someone say you can only have 3. Wrong. I know that for a fact.
Yeah.
You could have quite a few on the screen. Now, does it get as hectic as the arcade? If I didn't know I was playing on the Sharp, I would not be able to tell the difference via that.
Right.
So it's not like you get far, far, far less characters on the screen, but it's slightly less. Maybe in the arcade you can have 8, and on the Sharp you can have 5 or 6. All right, it's that close.
Yeah. And really, in single player, it probably is about the same. It probably only doubles up for 2-player versions.
Right. And again, and we should mention that the aside from the fact that it's got the game over screen, it also allows you 2-player simultaneous play.
Yeah. Smooth
as silk. Me and Luke switch between characters in the middle of the game. I mean, there are no aspects of this that aren't there. All the sound effects are there. I mean, it's a dead ringer, and it was so close that it sort of gave this game a notoriety that few 68,000 games had. One of the things I knew about the 68,000, I knew 2 or 3 things. Of course, I knew it had lots of great arcade ports. I knew it had a rockin' port of Street Fighter 2, and I knew it had an awesome version of Final Fight. I'd heard this over the years. That's what I knew, and so I went with one of those 2. And I have to say, it was great. Now, people ask how this compares to probably the best released version of this in America, which was the Sega CD version, the Mega CD. And the Mega CD version is really good. Have you ever played it?
I know it's good. I don't think I've actually loaded it up.
Yeah, it's actually remarkably good. And you get the voices in it and stuff. But much like the 68,000 version, it has a lower screen count of bad guys on the screen at once as well. So they sort of have the same flaws. And also the American version, I can't speak for how this was released in the UK, but in the American version, there's some censoring as well.
Yeah.
One of the things in the arcade version, when the bad guys show your Hagar's kidnapped daughter, they've got her on she's on TV and she's tied up and she's in basically a bra or a nightie, and they changed that in the American versions and all the releases. But in Japan, they don't care. Do whatever they want. So it was one of the better. It was one of the. In fact, I'd say with that in mind, it was closer port to the actual arcade.
Oh, I would say this is the closest port.
Well, the Sega version had the more appropriate music, I will say. But I mean, again, you've got to consider that this music is awesome.
Yeah.
And that Sharp is actually sort of known for having some awesome tunes. If you bebop around on YouTube, you could actually find a lot of people that just uploaded tunes. In fact, when I was trying to research the game you picked, I would find all of its songs that someone had ripped,
remixed,
and I had to really look hard to find playthroughs of just the actual game. So there are tons of sequels to Final Fight, but not on the Sharp. If you really want to beat yourself down, there's Final Fight 2, Final Fight Streetwise, Final Fight Double Impact. I've not liked any of these, I don't think, as much as the original.
The thing is the formula for the beat 'em up, unless you start to get into the crazy gimmicks, kind of like the Punishers or the Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, doing more of the same is just doing more of the same. So
right.
The genre died more than the sequels sucked, in my opinion.
Right, I understand. So, reviews on this, much like yourself, I didn't have any easy luck trying to find. I always look for Japanese reviews, and I can never find them anywhere. I always look. Like I don't know. I don't know. I assume they review stuff. We've had this conversation on the Amigos, and it's just I don't know what it is. I can never find what they think of stuff. I mean, but clearly this was a highly heralded game over here. But since it was released, no one really did a formal interview in a magazine or whatnot. Because no one had one. So with all that said, I looked this up on the eBay, and this thing it'll cost you now.
Yeah,
I found that the accompanying music CD added to the cost. So the bottom side of this, $87. That's as cheap as I found one go for. And I saw them going up into the 130s as well. So you're going to pay a few bucks. It's got a cool case. It's a good looking game.
Well, all the cases were good snap cases.
Yeah. If you elected for this system, it would be difficult. And I'm sure they have. I would assume that by now they have some sort of alternative loading. Like an SD card. So I'm sure someone's developed something over there. You got to consider a lot of these floppies are pretty much done. Now, of course, the Sharp also had a hard drive, and so some of these were in hard drive installable. Funny, when I was loading these, I could watch the DOS for this thing come up. I don't know if you saw it on here, and you could watch it. A lot of it was in Japanese, but a lot of the actual commands were in English, and you could see. It was very similar to a DOS I would be comfortable with. It would have to echo off and load this.
The ARG commands, all that stuff worked. Yep.
Yeah, it's nutty. So overall, it's a great game. I had a feeling it would be awesome, and we played it. We played the crap out of it on the 68,000. I know it's no slowdown. I know it's no anomalies. Everything's there, as you can remember, all the way down to stuff like the cop spitting. The getting choke held by one of the androids when they throw you into that wrestling ring to fight Sodom.
I didn't get that far.
It was there. I mean, it was they spared nothing. They left out nothing. The characters wing in just like they did. They would do all their jumps and their somersaults and stuff. They're all exactly the same. My gut tells me that when they developed this on the Sharp for the arcade, that they just basically took a couple guys out and put it on disc and sold it. I think that's exactly what I think happened.
What's really amazing though is this came on 2 discs, right?
Right.
That's it. Think about that.
Well, you also got to think it ran. I believe it ran on the 1 meg system.
Yeah.
So it is impressive. There's no doubt about it.
I mean, they shove in a lot of sprites, a lot of color, and the game looks good. It plays good. It literally it's playing the arcade.
Before we exit the 68,000, did you happen to just glance over any of the other offerings on there?
I actually watched a video that you can find on YouTube that loops every single game released on the show.
What was your overall impression?
A ton of shooters. I mean, it's I know I've harped on that a lot this episode, but seriously, when you look at their game catalog and you see so many shooters, and I'm a shooter fan-ish. It's not a genre that I steer away from, but I don't necessarily go, man, I gotta play all the shooters. The quality of games across all of the different platforms of shooters and fighting games, sports games, I think there were 4 total in the entire system. 2 baseball, a soccer, and then something else. I can't remember. It was a weird type of sport. It focused on what it knew, and which was shooters, and the graphics for the shooting games were awesome. They were all ones that were arcade ports, were arcade perfect, or at least certainly looked like it. But this isn't a system I'm going to personally run out and try to buy.
Well, like I said,
I would much rather have. I'm more tuned to a Neo Geo type thing where it focuses on fighting games.
Yeah,
I feel more comfortable as a gamer in that type of environment.
like I said, it's incredible. It's incredible attention to arcade perfection. Almost relegates it to an afterthought when you can play the arcade game now so easily. Now, I'm sure we just dipped our toe in the pool. I'm sure there are some of these games that offer maybe increased value from the arcade. Right? I have no doubt. And that would be where the money would lie. But I looked at like a Strider or a Street Fighter. Was it Ghouls and Ghosts? There are a couple of, and they were all. I mean, they were dead on.
Yeah.
But I mean, again,
they're all arcade ports.
That's right. And so it's so good. I mean, one of the charming things about playing arcade ports on, say, the 2600 or the Amiga or the Intellivision is the fact that they're so goofy.
They're so different.
There's a charm to going and seeing like, well, they tried their best.
Yes.
Here's what you got. So it's incredible ability. Actually, sort of, to me, it makes it like less appealing.
I agree. Because when they tried their best, they pulled it off.
Yeah, they did. I mean, so this is not I'm not here to bury it. I'm here to praise it. Yeah. It's incredible. They also, we should mention, had that Castlevania. I believe it ended up getting released on the PS2, but for a while it was an exclusive Castlevania game. Well, it was a hell of a game.
It was a remake of the arcade. That it was one of the few remakes that they pushed farther than than the source it was.
Because the arcade game wasn't very good, was it?
Well, it was okay.
I didn't like it.
It was okay.
All right, enough of this banter.
Oh,
hit the music.
Oh, all right. Oh boy.
Here we go. Take care of business, Brent.
Let's not wreck the world here.
It's time. Now, don't pull that. What are you doing? Oh,
I'm wrecking the world.
You're wrecking the world. We don't need to do anything, man.
Oh, there we go.
There it is. So let's see. We can see. Now I'm gonna let you spin the wheel.
We got added right at the top the Atari Lynx.
Yeah, I thought it was time to get a little more portability on there, so we put the Lynx on. Now, before we spin the wheel, Brent.
Yes.
We should. Well, we were talking about this before the show. We never really elaborated on the People's Choice category. Should it come up? So we talked about it. Here's how we're going to play that if it comes up. Since we don't do this live, we don't have a chat room. What we're going to do is, if the Player's Choice comes up, we're going to spin the wheel again, and we're going to pick whatever game or whatever system comes up for next week's show. And then we will give the people 1 week to make their decision. And on the next show, we won't spin the wheel. We will just play whatever the people decide.
Yes, and it will be in the description or in the comments of the YouTube, whichever gets the highest. Either we'll calculate how many times people commented on it and how many upvotes they got. Put it all into a big bag and choose from there.
All right, go ahead and spin the wheel and make the deal.
You know what? I'm actually rooting for some Super Nintendo.
Yeah, all right. Well, good luck. So far, whatever you rooted for, that we didn't get. Here we go. All right, good spin. And we've got...
Holy moly!
There it is. The Atari Lynx. Got it in one. And we've had some of these on here forever.
Yeah.
There's one that came up on the first
I'm gonna shuffle those. I think you're weighting the wheel down.
What do you know about the Atari Lynx?
It was a brick.
It was a big boy.
Yes.
Now I don't have an Atari Lynx. I do have I have the Sega portable.
Different beast.
Yeah,
it was also
brick, I've actually played the Lynx.
Oh yes,
and there's some quality titles on the Lynx that you don't think much about. So I'm looking forward to giving this a whirl. So next week we will pick 2 games from Atari's shot at handhelds, the Atari Lynx.
The short-lived Atari Lynx.
That's right. So, on that note, we will depart. And until next week,
exit stage left.